Thank you for the Kyoto JOLT chapter for inviting me to be part of the event. And I'm very delighted to be here and also meeting all of you online. So yeah, so also because I think because I was in Japan last fall and I had a great time at the JOLT, the national conference, and now I'm back. So I feel connected with JOLT, at the different levels. It's just great. Yeah. Um, when I got the invitation, I thought that what should I talk? Because it's built on what I talked at the JOLT conference, but I think I should kind of further develop that, more kind of focus on Japanese situation. So the title is Shifting Paradigm, Integrating Asset-Based Culture Responsive Pedagogical Principles in Teaching and Learning. And before I talk, I thought, well, I'll just share a little bit about my journey as an immigrant in ELT professional. Many people probably are kind of curious about who is this Yilin, right? And then what happened to her. So I was born in China, grew up in China. That was me wearing the little red scarf as the little red scarf girl in China, you know that. And then I went to university in China about 39 years ago, 38 years ago, as a young EFL teacher, full of dreams. So I left China, crossed the ocean, and went to Canada. Studied at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, University of Toronto, and to pursue my graduate studies. It was actually in Toronto. That was the first time I really experienced the discrimination, the the challenges many immigrants and face in North America. However, also it was in Toronto at OISE. I received the tremendous support from many wonderful professors and also colleagues and then cohort graduate students like Alistair Pennycook, Alistair Cummins, and Bonnie Norton, and Ryoko Kubota, and Angeline, and all these people, a whole bunch of this OISE, they say the critical pedagogy group. And then we studied with Roger Simon, and that really changed the mindset. So with the support of these wonderful professors and the students, so with the persistence, and then I became the first graduate student from mainland China to receive a PhD in applied linguistics and then curriculum instruction from OISE, one of the very prestigious universities in the world in, modern language education in that field. So it was at OISE actually got me exposed to TESOL Ontario and then TESOL International Association. So from there, I found that the really TESOL is a wonderful professional organization that can help me grow professionally. So I got more involved with TESOL. So became the president of TESOL in 2013, and then the president-elect, and became president, and then past president. And also through TESOL, I had a chance to work with many well-known scholars whose work that I read and respect. And then because they were also past president. And we every year at the TESOL convention, we have the past president luncheon. So people meet and reconnect. So that's been wonderful. Also, I have had the chance to work with graduate students, with immigrant students, and doing training, and then became a Fulbright senior scholar. And last year, it was a pleasant surprise that the U.S. Department of State and then recognized me as one of the 30 English language specialists who have made a long-lasting impact to the English language teaching in the world. And then also they really recognize my commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. So I found that's a huge honor that, people recognize the work that I do. So I think my story is just one of the many stories about this bilingual, non-native English-speaking ELT professionals who are willing to take risks, who are willing to cross borders building bridges, and including multilingual speakers. And then together, we are making a difference, not only in our own professional lives, and also in the field of TESOL. So now we can see the field has evolved really a lot, significantly, in comparison with what happened 30, 40, 50 years ago. So this is just my little story about who I am. So, and there are three things I want to talk for today's talk. I talk about the shifting paradigms in English and teaching, and why should we do that? So, and then also, what are the asset-based cultural responsive pedagogical principles and how to implement them? So I'll give some suggestions and some strategies that we can use them. Let's focus on the first question. Why must equity and access be a top priority for our 21st century education in Japan? Because now we are almost, educators that at this panel in Japan. So before we talk about Japan, I want to show some UNESCO's data. 1 in 5 children, adolescents, and youth is currently out of school. I think a pandemic, this data was before pandemic. Pandemic only made things worse, not better. Yeah, this is the data because I checked, and then since the pandemic, they stopped doing this statistical calculation, but they have another report about the impact of pandemic to world education, that girls especially got a huge impact. A lot of girls were not able to go back to school anymore as a result of the pandemic. And also take a look at in Asia. What concerns me is this red bar, the upper secondary age. The primary was relatively okay. The lower secondary was okay. It's the red one, the upper secondary age, this 15, 16, 17-year-old. They're not in school. They are not anywhere. They're just hanging out, and then who knows what they are doing. I think in Japan, probably we have similar issues, but a lot of teachers that I interacted with, they say, well, this data is some other countries, like, we know in Southeast Asia, but doesn't really apply to Japan. So I did some, research, and then just some newspaper articles, and then look at, are there gaps in equity, diversity, and access in Japanese schools? What do you think? So think about this. Here, there are some articles. In Japan, this is the newspaper, the Japan Time article that was published a few months ago, looking at the difficulty of inclusive education for differently abled children. And also, this survey that concerns me, back in 2004, and people think, the children from wealthy families having access to better education, that's a problem. People feel that's a concern. Why only wealthy families have access to better education? How about others? Look at 2018. People just feel indifference. They say, well, what can we do? It's just, that's the way it is. And then giving up? Oh, what's going on here in Japan? Because we are educators in Japan. This data is very concerning. This is February 5th, 2021. And then this is the website. And then you can take a look at this. That when I look at this, I say, this is definitely an issue in Japan we need to address. Take a look at it here. Japan also starting slowly opening the door to invite migrant workers, people from different countries working in Japan. But where are they? How about their children? Here, the Nippon, this article, and also looking at, are we making another underclass? How about this immigrant education? Are those children, are they being neglected? What happened? And also the expats children in Japan, are running the risk of falling behind in Japanese lessons. All these issues that needs to be addressed before the gaps getting bigger and bigger. So these are the issues, that's equity issues, access issues, inclusive issues that we really need to look at. And then, so that's why we have to shift our mindset. That's a huge need to have education. The unfortunate thing is that the need is not equal to access, and the access is not equal to equity. Who have access to quality education? Who don't have access to that? And also, when we talk about access and equity, sometimes people get confused about equality and equity. Equality and equity, access is not equal to equality, is not equal to equity. Equality is leveling the playing field. Everybody has the opportunity. I give you the opportunity, you come to school. However, not every student can reach the fruit, to get the fruit. Not every student would be successful. Some students are falling behind. Whereas equity is looking at a student starting from different starting points, but with the right curriculum, with the right support, with right resources, every student can be successful. Success for all, that should be the goal. It's not just say, I give you access, okay, you have equality. And then all you have, diversity. Diversity in the past talked a lot. Diversity to me is a means to equity. Diversity is not the goal. Equity should be the goal. So that's the mindset we need to start thinking. And also take a look at UNESCO, that back in 2015, UNESCO had this Education 2030 framework for action and ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. That was signed by 184 countries. No joke, back in 2015. But how have all these countries been doing? That's very problematic. Are we really doing this ensure inclusive, equitable quality education, lifelong learning for all, or just for some? These are the questions we should all ask ourselves, including our Japanese educators or policymakers. See what we have been doing. Yeah, okay. So now we see the needs to have this paradigm shift. Now I'm going to propose some actions for change and then also suggest some critical skills and strategies. Historically, when we talk about achievement gaps or equity, we always talked about the student learning problems. Oh, my students are not ready for college or university studies. Oh, my students are not motivated and they're not there. I don't know how come they got promoted to my class. They don't fit. And they just like, oh, this whole bunch of trouble. Deficit mind thinking. When actually we need to think it's our institutional leadership learning problems. It's our practitioners' learning problems. Because we don't know how to help them. And then the educational system, especially the higher education system, is founded by, they say, weird people. Weird stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic people. That's the people founded Western higher education. We adopted that system, but a lot of things have not changed the way that higher education operates and how the higher education train teachers, and then the teachers go back and then kind of use the same kind of practice to, educate the future generations. So the institution, the leadership's mindset are not prepared to really help those students, all students to be successful. And also our practitioners, we don't know how to handle those students either. So we need to change the mindset, looking at It's our problem, rather than thinking that's the learning problem of our students. I love this book, Equity Talk to Equity Walk. So at the conferences or events, we cannot just adapt and say, I'm going to learn some best practices, learn some strategies or some games or some things that I can bring to the classroom to use. That's important. Yeah, that's important. But the most important thing is we have to shift our mindset to equity, to really truly like looking at the way how we view our students, how we, kind of view our own teaching, performances and the teaching strategies we have been using, looking at the textbooks, materials and things, really looking at opportunity gaps, challenging curriculum gaps, and then fix problems from there. So that's why we need to change the deficit mind to asset-based mindset. What is asset-based pedagogies? Asset-based pedagogies is focusing on the strengths that the diverse students bring to the classroom. Because I'm going to show that, okay, it is a direct response to deficit-based models for education of the past. And the asset-based pedagogies value the different lived experiences and the knowledge of students, including marginalized students, as asset, not deficit. When we change that mindset, I'm going to show you later, there's something, and then shift the deficit mindset. We have some indicators, right? Because we measure student work performance. We have indicators, and we also have perspectives, and then we have some focal lenses. With deficit mindset, we look at the things, what we need to address, okay? So that indicators, looking at the poverty issue, looking at the isolation, aliens, the troubled childhood, some, okay, dysfunctional families, maybe that's low motivation. These are the things we need to address. And then also view our students' experiences of family and then communities as inferior. Oh, that should be replaced with more superior, better practices, okay? Just like the boarding school in the United States for indigenous people back in early 60s. And then we need to have intervention and adverse the experience and also fix problems, kind of tunnel vision of risks. This is, I adapted from Chase, that I like the way that but his, approach is looking at the community asset and well-being. So I kind of adapted this, looking at our education and teaching with students. With asset-based, if you think it is asset-based pedagogy, and then with this asset-based approach, you look at not things to address, but things to build on. How can we build on the cultural diversity? How can we build on the social connections to make all students, families, and communities feel connected with the larger society? Looking at health, well-being, wellness, looking at the resilience, instead of saying the low motivation, how can we develop student resilience? And also view learners' experience as potentials, family, community, as resources of wisdom to honor, explore, and expand, rather than inferior. And also, the focal lens is really looking at the relationships and then really focus on belonging. Now we talk about inclusion, right? Inclusion. Yeah, diversity, inclusion, equity, and inclusion is important. But to me, I feel belonging is more important. You can include a person in the group, but the person doesn't feel belong here. He's not going to get engaged. He's just sit there and watch, and then he's not going to be there. So belonging, it's more important. Once they have the sense of belonging, they will be intrinsically motivated. That's the focus we need to have. The asset-based approach is focused on this equity, well-being, looking at the agencies rather than fixing problems, have a clear vision of the future. So that's asset-based mindset. With that, culturally responsive teaching or culturally responsive instruction, because when we use the acronym CRT, sometimes people will say critical race theories. And cultural responsive teaching, it's not really critical race theories. People get confused, and then it's related. But the cultural responsive instruction, so I like to use cultural responsive instruction or asset-based pedagogical, cultural responsive pedagogical principles. It's not deficit-based pedagogies. It is not just about the multicultural or social justice education, even though they are closely related. The culturally responsive instruction is about building students' learning power, brain power, by improving the information processing skills and also build a sense of belonging. Belonging, I cannot emphasize enough how important that is. So by using that and then using culturally relevant learning tools and materials, so it is grounded in social cognitive neuroscience. So these are the 3 books that I really like: culturally sustaining pedagogies, culturally responsive teaching, and the cultural responsive teaching and the brain. Lots of concrete strategies and ways to look at things. Yeah, they are slightly different from these 3, authors, and then but they are closely related. Yeah. So based on the various studies that I have done, and also looking at the different, broad approaches and things, I kind of synthesized 8 key principles for culturally responsive instruction for English language teaching field. And then the first one is we need to unpack personal implicit biases and reflect on our personal cultural lens. This is for educators. And then second is we need to cultivate a sense of belonging for all students to succeed, not just some. Respect and integrate student cultures into curriculum instruction. That's the third principle. And then value and maximize student home languages and focus on their strengths. Really asset-based, strengths-based approach that works better. Next one is utilize transformative teaching and learning approaches. And then the next one is building supportive communities and allyship with different stakeholders. That's so important because we educators cannot work this alone. Even just by ourselves in the classroom, we cannot do this by ourselves. We have to have a team. We have to have a learning community and also allyship from different stakeholders. And then the 7th is communicating in a culturally responsive manner. The last one is prepare students for constructive social changes with 21st century skills. Because of the time constraint, I cannot elaborate all these 8 principles. I highlighted a few, so I'm going to just touch upon a few principles that, in my talk. How to unpack personal implicit bias, the IBs, reflect on our, personal cultural lens. Everybody has implicit biases because that's the way we grown up. That's the media that kind of penetrating information, the community, the way, the society that kind of, we got brainwashed in a way, let's say that way. And then, so we all have these unconscious implicit biases. And in order to change that, we really have to be mindful and internally motivated, be kind of on the alert for our own personal implicit biases. And because when we look at a student in a classroom, do you tend to call girls more or boys more? And then which student get more attention, which student get less attention? And now what happened when someone make a comment and you naturally chived in, and then later you found out, oh, why I'm doing that? And then be mindful. And then once you recognize some kind of biases, scrub our brain, de-bias it, and then really replace that stereotype with something different. And then just like flip it, test it, yes. And then also reflect on our own conceptual baggages. There's because I mentioned to some people, this morning I attended an implicit biases training organized by TESOL. And then there are a lot of training activities that we can do. I also, when I directed the faculty development program for my college district before my retirement. I did a lot of training in this area as well. Yeah, so that's a lot of things. The second principle is cultivate a sense of belonging, academic mindset, so all students can succeed. Okay, so that's something. I like this framework. And this is a kind of by a group of scholars. They look at really culturally responsive teaching, really is trying to cultivate academic mindset. Looking at the competence precedes confidence. Okay, there are 4 components for academic mindset. The first, we really have to let students believe I can succeed at this through productive struggle. That's another thing, how to really going through that productive struggle, and that's a later for another workshop. And also, and the student need to believe my ability and competence grow with my effort. And also, I belong to this academic community. The belonging is very important. As I mentioned earlier, people have to feel they are part of this community. I belong to this academic community, and then I can really be motivated and then get involved and then to do the best that I can to be successful. And then also students needs to feel the work has value for me, not just to pass the class, but the work has value for me, not for this course 5 years from now. It's transferable skills. They need to know that. There's a very good framework. It's called the TILP, Transparency in Teaching and Learning in Higher Education. Washington State is one of the state that signed up, that about the 35 states participated in this national project. That TILP is really looking at how can we make sure our assignment is directed to student feel has value for students to do this so that they can, be motivated, they can be successful. And then that's another thing, and that we can talk about later. It's not about, so culturally responsive teaching, it's not about kumbaya, food, costumes, holidays. It is really about building academic mindset. Yeah. Okay. The next principle I want to talk is value and maximize student home languages and focus on their strength. Okay. So many students, they speak, maybe English is their 3rd or the 4th language. It's not just the 2nd language. And I love this Valentina Gonzalez. It's a 2nd grade teacher. She has this one, making student asset our #1 teaching priority. Changing mindset from my EL cannot speak English to what language can my EL speak? I add an S because some students speak more than 1 languages, right? So I just add an S. I feel that, that's not just 2nd language, maybe the 3rd or the 4th or 5th language. We don't know. And my EL are unable to read on grade level. 2, how can I accommodate this textbook? What resources are available? From, I don't know how to help my ELs, to who can I reach out for support? Where can I learn more to help them be successful? And then from my EL seems off task, angry or unhappy, to how can I make the classroom environment inviting and safe? That's the way gradually we change our mindset from deficit mindset to growth mindset, strength-focused mindset, asset-based mindset. That's the way to change. Okay, with this strength-based perspectives, we view students, or especially marginalized students from marginalized population. They have unique strengths, passion, and interest, maybe different from yours, but they do have interest in something that meaningful to them. And they are confident and capable in settings that are meaningful, safe, and important to them. And everybody has innate personal powers. Don't say they're not motivated and they don't know how to learn. They all have these innate personal powers. It's a matter of how we can discover that, help them demonstrate that power. And then they have a lot to offer to their peers and to school communities, including their communities. rich resources for educating others about their community and culture. They thrive in differentiated instruction, personal learning environments, and the universal design for learning. This kind of approaches really help those students, thrive, and you can see the difference, the progress they can make. And another thing, because the higher education, as I mentioned, was established by weird people, and then the system was that way. So even though those students from marginalized population background may not march to the beat of traditional school design, it doesn't mean they are out of step. They are marching, but they are marching in a different style, in a different way, different from the way that the mainstream culture, the mainstream education expected them to do. So it's a matter of how we can help them and also to understand them and help them grow. The next one that I want to elaborate a little bit is utilize transformative teaching and learning approaches. What is transformative teaching? That needs to start with each of us. Okay, the traditional approach really kind of the low agency. We're all familiar with this. Deliver instruction, lecture-centered classroom learning, and instructions in standards, one size fits all. Students learn to do things, and we focus on memorization and rote memory conformity, and looking for the right answers and segmented curriculum. And also, student tends to have this passive consumption of knowledge. When we do assessment, it's assessment of learning. Whereas transformative approach really focusing on high agency, facilitating learning, student-centered learning. Learning is everywhere, anytime, not just in the classroom. So the personalized learning environment issue now is on the rise, looking at especially the pandemic. Like differentiated, personalized learning is do to learn, do things to learn, not only just learn to do. Application focused, encourage curiosity, problem solving, critical thinking, integrated curriculum, active learning opportunities, and assessment for learning and for innovation, not assessment of learning. That's transformative teaching. Okay. And then how can we prepare students for constructive social changes with 21st century skills? We know 7 C's. This is by Trillian and Fado in the 7 C's. That's 2009. They had their famous book, or the bestseller, 21st Century Skills, Learning for Life in Our Times. This book came out, and then the partnership of 21st Century Learning, and then also helped the North America totally revamped their curriculum. And now they have this common course and all these other things. It's really focusing on this 7 C's, the 21st century skills. That's the component. I like the Marcel that they recategorize into like the 7 C's into ways of thinking, ways of working, tools for work, and skills for living in the world. That is easier to remember the 7 C's. And then I think after that, I think it's since 2015, more and more educators talking about there are a lot more skills that we need for 21st century skills. So I look at that and then kind of synthesize the different scholars and different ways. There are 5 more skills that we need for 21st century learning: resilience, agility, adaptability, STEM skills, even for humanities students, STEM skills, because the way of the analytical skills, the way of thinking, that's important. Everybody needs to have some basic STEM skills, and SMAC, social, mobile, and then analytics and cloud skills. These are the 5 more skills that people consider should be added to as part of the 21st century skills. Okay. And then, so when we talk about SMACs, and then this is from Jane Hart, and then he has these like top tools for learning. He kind of categorized there are 100 tools for learning. There were a lot of overlapping: personal learning, workplace learning, education. I look at these 100 tools. I think Probably I'm familiar with about 20. I think that's how much that I think a lot of tools that I'm not quite familiar. I heard of, but I have not really used it. Yeah. So a lot of things to learn. But our younger generation, they are digital natives. They just know how to do that. This is my grandson. He was when he was 11 months old. Guess what was his second word? The first word is mama. Second word, iPad. That's his second word, iPad. Because he had a little iPad. He could just flip and then look at, these cartoons and things. It's just, I don't know. These kids, when they grow up, and then they definitely will way surpass us in terms of using technology in learning the SMAC skills. Yeah. Right. And then let's talk about agility and adaptability. Agility is the ability and the willingness to learn from experience, then apply that learning to perform successfully under new situation. Wagner has this definition. Adaptability is, to embrace change and be flexible. That we all know that, right? Okay. And then this is from Cole. He's a critical issues in educational technology. He talked about these people who are agile and adaptable and has these 9 traits in a way. Okay. They accept the responsibility. They are very versatile and flexible, communicate very well. They can deliver desired results in new and challenging situations, engage in critical thinking. They find the solutions to challenging problems and then challenging problems and situations. They gauge and manage changes very well. I just use A to I, so kind of like list them easier to remember. Multitasking, handle many roles simultaneously. They can identify like-minded people and understand others. So for resilience, also resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties and toughness that we know. And then pandemic really trained all of us to be resilient. These are the 9 traits that I adapted from Gerstein, and then I talk about that's how resilient people are. They are fully aware of the strengths and the asset they have. They bounce back. Strong AQ, that's the thing. They are never been beaten up, but they bounce back. Very courageous and calm, and passion-driven focus, and then emotional management is very good, and also personal agency. And then also another thing that's important for resilient people, they reach out to others. They care for others. You matter. I know you can do it. They also encourage others to go along and then not get beaten up. I showed this picture at the JOLT conference. When you take a look at this person, what came to mind? This is one of the students that many years ago that we had. You see the chains, you see his look and his ways, and this is the student story. And then how can we train resilience? And then there are a lot of ways we can do. Everybody has a story. So this is the untold success stories of student color project I did about 15 years ago. And then we had this. And then he said, well, being a person of color, a minority with disability, I'm still a human being. I have right. So Fred Mata, he was from a farm worker, migrant worker, and then lived in the world. He said, you were lucky if you could graduate from high school. I always thought education was oriented to the majority. And then he studied at Seattle Central College, first just a 3-credit class. And then because he wasn't sure whether he was called university material. But at that time, he said, I found myself stuck, wanted to turn back. I just wanted to quit, but I kept on because I knew I needed to be there. And then he became very successful. And then also he found he had, learning disability, and he felt he was minority among minorities, but he would not give up. So he successfully finished, the college education, now works in Seattle City, and in the Department of Aging and Disability Services. With him to serve this group of people, you can see the passion he has, because he himself has gone through the struggles and to do that. And then so there's another student story. I have a choice. That using this student story is very powerful, not only inspire us, and they can inspire our students as well. That's something to show that resilience and then the ways people do. And then so here are more strategies we can use in the online and hybrid settings when we are trying to develop all these 21st century skills, 7 C's plus that 5 more. The storytelling, I always love storytelling. Digital storytelling is great. There are a lot of online tools and YouTube and all these things that you can use. And also the personal learning environments. And then learners decide what to learn, and also teachers, a facilitator, and we have supporting environment, and all the things that we can do, and then to help students learn. Okay, and this is another thing that I like to use in my class is to use this Diamante point, and then talking about the resilient, and just a noun, adjective, verb, noun, verb, adjective, and it's very easy, right? The conventional way. So I'm going to show you an example here, because during pandemic, this is one of the students, and then because a colleague of mine shared that, yeah. And one of the assignments is to ask a student, just go outside in Seattle, find something that really kind of like represent your thinking and the things that you feel strongly about yourself. So they went out to do that assignment. The student wanted to go to Kubota Garden. Seattle has a Japanese garden. And then he only found the garden was closed because of the pandemic. He was a little bit disappointed. And then on the way back, and then walk on the way back, he stumbled into this tree, this old tree with these bulging roots and then branches coming out. It's wintertime, just like this time of the year. And then February, March, like February, yeah. And all of a sudden, it just struck him. He felt that I had to sketch this one. This is something that really kind of resonated me strongly. Just he did this tree, and then the poem. Me, cheerful, dreamful, study, work, socialize. Pandemic, disruptions, isolation, loneliness. Stressed, despair, not giving up. Resilient, fully alive, me. Resilient, me. If we can do some poem and something, this tells a lot about who our students are, right? Yeah. And then also, when I directed the faculty development program for Seattle colleges, before my retirement, every year I organize summer institute. This was one of the institutes we did. And then it's because pandemic, everything has to be online. We did the Padlet, a dynamic me. So that's resilient me, a dynamic me. You can use me, this one. It's a really great icebreaker. Like first week of the class with your students, you can use so many different activities and then to talk about. And they did this name tag, and we use Unsplash and their personal, photos and things. I learned so much about my colleagues. These are faculty members across different disciplines participating in this. And then just the first day, and with that first few hours, we bonded. This is something we can do it with our students as well. And then there are more activities we can do. You can create a situation, either individual or in group setting. Students have to adapt to a given problem. And then you can give them a variety of tools for, to solve new problems. And also give opportunities for writing. Don't just always ask them to write this 5-paragraph essay, and then do something creative. They can write a blog or something that's really speaks to them, and then they can write something, create some community newsletter or poster or whatever that just make them feel useful, right? Yeah. and also design project-based learning activities to encourage teamwork to solve problems. Games can never go as planned because they always change. There are some websites here that you can use the ways to promote the agility, adaptability, and all these things. There are so many other new ways to do it. And also here, I really like project-based learning. That is something that really, and also service learning. And then that really fully incorporate 21st century skills. It's to the fullest extent you can think of. That's beautifully executed if you properly use project-based learning. There are so many things we can do. I don't have time to talk about that. And here is the using project-based learning in integrated digital English acceleration program. This was a program that our college had a grant from Gates Foundation to help immigrant refugee students who, come to the adult basic education program, because those students, they need the adult education, these students, they really need to have digital skills and also along with their English learning. And we got the Gates Foundation grants. Many of my colleagues didn't want to teach this class because it's challenging. Many of these students, they barely finished third grade elementary school, let alone and then learning digital literacy. So the class, when I had them, about 20 students in the class, half of the students never had a computer. And then some students only have one computer with their children needs to use it. And then they didn't even have an email. So we started with email, creating an email for everybody, because in the class, they have to use Google Doc to collaborate in writing. So first thing is give everybody an email address. I gave them universal password. I don't want them to remember their password. I know that they're going to forget. That would be a nightmare for me. Everybody has the same password, logon name, just their first name plus last initial. That if they forget, I can help them restore that. And they did beautifully after we had a quarter system, we have quarter system. They were able to use PowerPoint presentation, writing simple, compositions, use Google Doc. And then even later, they got involved with service learning on campus, looking at the sustainability issues. I was so moved by the work they can do. These are some of the things all the skills they can help. I learned way more, I think, from working with this group of students. One of the most rewarding experiences in my teacher training and adult education, career, I think, is working with this group of students. Yeah. They say idea, idea, idea. They love it. I love it. And then, so let's, I'm going to talk briefly, I think, I'm going to look at the time. Okay. What is asset-based cultural response teaching practices? There are three components. We need to identify asset, and then activating asset, and then cultivating asset. That is asset-based culturally responsive instruction. How we do that, and then do an asset map. Remember the Gonzalez, that map? You can do a map, identify and raise awareness of the asset our learners have. And then activate asset is the next step. And then support teachers to identify potentials in students. You use the map or you do a list, whichever way that's creative that you think meaningful to you, you can do it. The next step is to activating the asset. Identify its first important step, and then develop action plans, techniques. The supporting role of teacher, what we can do, and how can we link in student asset with a specific project that we have for this class. And then group learners based on the asset-based groups and the rotate groups, not always those groups. And the collaborating with parents, community, and other teachers in order to activating asset. And then cultivating asset, revise, review, and revisit asset maps and action plans and make changes accordingly. So in that way, you can ensure everything meets the needs of the learners and it's appropriate. That is asset-based cultural responsive teaching practice, practices. This is the thing that I hope that we can do. So I briefly touched upon a few principles because I only have 50 minutes. So for culturally responsive educators,
You have 5 minutes.
I know. Yeah, they are committed. I just have 2 slides. Yes, good. They are committed to unpacking personal implicit biases, reflecting on personal cultural lens, and also cultivating a sense of belonging for all students to succeed. They respect, integrate student cultures into curriculum instruction. I didn't have time to talk about this part, but I think many of you are familiar with this part. They value, maximize student home languages, and then focus on strengths. I really shared some strategies of how to identify student strengths. They utilize transformative teaching and learning approaches and also build supportive communities and allyship with different stakeholders and communicate in a culturally responsive manner. And also, they prepare everything to help students to become for constructive social changes with 21st century skills. These are the 8 principles that I briefly outlined. Here are some of the sample publications that I like that I think that you can, take a look or ask your school library to order one. And then this is my final slides. So our, theme for the event is development and then globalization. I changed to glocalization because we need to have globe and the local. Needs to be glocalization. We need to look at globally but act locally in Japanese education. What this is about? It is about cultivating equity committed, reflective, resilient, innovative ELT educators as leaders, and also building CRI guided academic rigor, close equity and achievement gaps. And it is about integrating asset-based, culturally responsive pedagogical principles and strategies to achieve student success beyond English language classroom. Okay, thank you. Arigatou gozaimasu. That is the end of my